Well, hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us for another advisor webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about all you've got is reporting. You're doomed. Learn how to bring your data to life. So, this is going to be a run through conceptually the types of data that fundraisers typically have and the different kinds of front end business intelligence systems, reporting, dashboards, data discovery, which is what we do to help get the data out and make it useful. And kind of one of our premises is we see a lot of overuse of reporting and dashboards for discovery and analytics purposes, and that typically causes a cycle of pain. That cycle of pain is going, back to the database to keep asking for new cuts of the data or trying to offload the stuff in Excel and kind of slice and dice and play with it, explore it there. So we're going to lay out a framework and then show some examples and conclude with use cases for the different types of tools out there. So I'm Doug. I'm your host. I'm the leader of Advisor Solutions. We're a data analytics software and services company that specializes in the higher ed, healthcare, not-for-profit fundraising space. We've got 10, 12 years of experience and a bunch of clients. So just to dive in and get started, most of the data that we all work with comes from a CRM system. And essentially that system has a variety of inputs, whether it's events or it's giving or it's contacts or whatever it is. It goes into a database, set of tables in there. There's a bunch of applications and transformations that cause things to happen, like record gifts or manage an event or whatever. And then there's a bunch of outputs that it has, reports and dashboards and stuff. And these databases are conceptually similar from one vendor to another, but the table names and structuring can be quite a bit different. The transforms, see if we get this thing to move. Try this. Okay, there we go. These things are designed for key operational functions like gift processing, event management, field officer activities, prospect staging, solicitation tracking, appeal management, and so forth. So there's a set of apps that run around these things. In the course of doing this, for people like us that are trying to create content and synthesis and analysis and direction out of the data and the stories, there's this rich content. So for example, prospects, capacity data, it comes in different ways. It can be a wealth screen. Generally, there's employment data in these things, so you can parse out on job title and get proxies for capacity. You can leverage in public domain information based on where people are. There's a variety of ways to get information on capacity, and we generally recommend looking at several of them and bringing them together. Attachment, there's all kinds of data on how attached or engaged somebody is to your institution, whether they've been coming to events regularly, or if it's a school, they've been coming to reunions, they've been giving regularly. All of that stuff's in there, and it can be parsed together to turn into whether somebody's engaged, highly engaged. You'll see a little bit of this later, but it's really useful information. And also interests. I mean, the third key thing, if you're trying to raise money, you need to know, do they have wealth? How engaged are they to your cause, your institution, and what are their interests? And this can be parsed out of newsletter clicks, types of events people attend, reunion surveys, all kinds of different ways of figuring that out of the content that these systems have and run through. Major giving, we can look at portfolio or pool size and penetration levels. You see some of this a little bit later. Activity levels, stage balance, movement through stages, solicitation levels. Are we asking at the right level relative to the capacity and attachment of the prospects that have been assigned? Is a $300,000 ask good or bad? Maybe it's great if it's a $1 million prospect who's highly engaged, and maybe $30,000 would be good if the person's disconnected. But if you get those mixed up, you're going to be under asking or over asking and having trouble closing, or closing really the $30,000 ask when it should be a $300,000. Yield and revenue. So these are all, we would call these performance drivers of a major giving program, for which the data is stored in the tables in these systems. Annual giving, it's about retention of current donors, reacquisition of lapsed donors, acquisition of non-donors, which appeals are most effective, and how are they focused against these segments. And then in the non-donor world, not everybody is the same. And how do you segment? Which are the most attractive non-donors? Which non-donors should be getting the higher touch appeals, and what frequency should that be? All the data to untangle what's working and what's not is stored in these systems. And the business intelligence system on the front end should be bringing that out so you can use it and interact with it. Campaign feasibility, like how much are these prospects worth in total by group, by sports, by science majors, whatever the different themes would be. What are our overall results and what's the success and the challenges? So our proxy is these systems, whether they're Blackbaud systems, Ellucian systems, Salesforce, they're all kind of doing the same thing. But if you think holistically about the data that runs through it, there's incredible rich content in them. And then there's 5 ways to get the stuff out. So this is basic business intelligence. There are reporting systems. There are a bunch of reporting systems. We'll take a look at some of them in a little bit. You can put them on top of a warehouse. Data warehouse would take the data tables that are in the core system and make them easier to work with. Does a bunch of formatting, grouping, makes the reporting system a lot easier to deploy. Don't have to have them. We see lots of cases where the reporting systems are going back against the core tables in the CRM system. That's fine. This makes it easier. There's also a lot of cases where you take the warehouse and you put Tableau or Power BI or one of these visual dashboards on top of it. These are all about trying to get stuff out in a fairly structured, regular way. There's another class of business intelligence tool called data discovery. And Excel would be a good example of that, where you can slice and dice it, pivot it, look at it a variety of different ways. And there are specific data discovery tools like us, and ClickTech would be another one. There's a lot more in this. Gartner, which is one of the business intelligence industry analysts, Forrester, put out reports on this. But there's basically these 2 classifications and a bunch of different ways of getting at each of them. And they do different things. So reports and dashboards are basically about pre-structuring content in a warehouse or out of the database tables. It's primarily static. It's quick, essential facts, well-formatted, pixel-perfect reports, and basically fairly standard outputs with some ability to cross-query and navigate a little bit. A data discovery tool, on the other hand, is much more ad hoc. It's when you don't really know what question you're trying to answer. You need to see the data and explore it. Highly interactive. Don't know the questions. You want to see the stories, drill in, slice and dice to get lists. Much more of an ad hoc analytical sandbox. And these things solve different problems. So, typically reports go in first because you need financials, funds management, activity reports, campaign results, field officer dashboards. Those tend to be fairly structured and fit this lineup really well. The problem becomes so you put the reports and the dashboards and then you start using it for prospect identification, which is inherently a discovery operation where you're slicing and dicing different ways, trying to get lists out. It's not this preset, well-formatted output. It's different. Or annual giving. If you're looking at results, it can fit over here. But if you're actually trying to understand which appeals work best to reacquire 2- and 3-year lapsed donors, that's not a reporting function. That'll cause a cycle of pain of continually querying back against the report database to get what you need. And over here, you're going to look at an example of major giving metrics. This can go either way, but quite honestly, when this works best, it's used with a team and really a discovery process. And you want to look at different field officers and see, Michael is doing a great job this year getting things closed. Awesome. But I'm a little concerned because he hasn't penetrated a lot of his portfolio and his current open asks look low. What is behind that? What's the story? We're going to actually explore that in a minute. So if you actually want to explore and drill down and go from the top level to the detail, that's much more of a data discovery tool arrangement. So I'm laying this out in some detail up here because we often see these come first, then they get overused and you try to force them into doing all the jobs over here. And it's like putting a round peg in a square hole. It really doesn't work. And there are a separate set of tools over here. And again, the business intelligence industry analysts like the Gartner Group or the Forrester Group have a bunch of reports that would more generally go into detail on this. But for sake of time here, I'm going to move on. So our world, just to back up, we're on the right. We're on the data discovery side. So I'm going to go a little bit into that for a few minutes and come back to a whole framework. So the concept of what we do is these represent a bunch of tables. Some of them have demographic content. Some of them have affinity content, events attended, reunions, activities, capacity. And the first thing is they come in to an in-memory mart, which is different than a reporting tool. And they get synced or affiliated with each other. And then when you want to answer a question, you need little bits of content from each of those tables a data discovery tool links those tables and quickly, dynamically on the fly. It's not pre-structured. It's done on the fly. You're getting the bits of information you need to figure out who's my next 5 million prospect. Maybe it's somebody with a capacity rating of this amount who has been to so many of these types of events and so many reunions and lives in a certain region. And because that's where we're having an event for this, we want to find these people and so forth and so on. So it's very easy with this kind of a flexible in-memory model to do this kind of work. And so a data discovery tool will access multiple data sources. It could be the 40 tables in a CRM Advanced or a Blackbaud, Razor's Edge, NXT system. There might be other data that's in Excel. It might be a reunion survey. Might be newsletter click-throughs, which are really helpful for seeing recent interest and what their interest is. But if you load these things, they come into an in-memory mart. So they're sitting in an app somewhere. Excel is this, but Excel is like one table at a time. We and ClickTech would be examples of where you can bring 50, 100, 150 tables in, all the dimensions, and then you do some transform on them. Every day you load them, you do the transforms, you blend them. You have to hook the tables, key the tables together, maybe copy some things from one table to another. You have to synthesize, like if you want to create an attachment score, you're going to have to figure out for each person how many of the last 5 years they made a gift. Or maybe you want to look at the events table and put a column in for each person, how many events they've been to in the last 6 months, maybe the last 2 years, all of that. So, the process is you load the data, you have to connect it together. You got to create these different synthesized variables, and then typically there's some modeling that's done. Like if you want to figure out attachment, you got to run some predictive models and figure out how do reunions compare with attending an event versus making a gift. And depending on which institution, they all will have different weights. Sometimes the reunions might count more. Sometimes coming to this really cool event counts more. And the modeling tools are pretty sophisticated. And we embed it in our app, and it can put these weights on. The weights can be saved, and every time you load the data, it rescores. And so every day you get updated attachment scores. Somebody came over the weekend to a reunion and made a gift and joined a committee. They're going to move from maybe disconnected on Friday. They'll be engaged on Monday, which is pretty cool. But you want, in this world where you're trying to slice the data, mine the data, explore it, you need this power to bring all this data together and keep it regularly updating, not offline in some periodic report, but in a system that fronts the CRMs and does this, and then empowers the team. And you'll see examples of, in a minute, of this. Empowering the team can be into an app like ours, or we can create the scores and the calculations and send them back to the reporting system, because maybe some of this calculated output should also go to the reporting side. You don't want to calculate it both ways, so wherever it's calculated, the other side should be able to get it. But then you're going to have this interactive front end to do the discovery. So let's kind of build out what the systems look like. So this is holistic. I'm going to just start with, on the left, the data, and then we're going to go through blending and synthesizing, then modeling and binning, and then we're going to go through kind of working with it. So CRM systems, there's a bunch of them. There's more, but they got stuff on people, gifts, events, wealth, sports, and so on. And usually there's other data. In healthcare, it would be patient encounters, might be call center data that's not in the CRM, clicks on newsletters, survey data, social media, wealth screens. So holistically, the CRM usually has most, but there's usually other sources. So now let's look at these three areas: data access and blending, synthesis and modeling, and then outputs. So there's two ways to access and blend. One way is just to use the source tables. That's usually a little bit rugged. You usually need to format them somewhere. So a data warehouse does that, and I know a lot of you have that. This is pre-structured frameworks. It's comprehensive. We would call it heavy. It takes a while to put in. It's a lot of pre-structuring. And it's great because it gives you this content that can then be used enterprise-wide in whatever system. There's also, in the data discovery tools, tend to have these in-memory marts, which are fast, flexible. They're set for analysis, so they've got this slice and dice focus. They don't do the pre-structuring. They regroup and re-index and recalculate on the fly. So it's a very different thought process behind how the data gets stored than up here. You can export lists easily. It's very light, and it's a departmental problem focus. So often these will complement each other, but these will tend to feed data discovery tools. These will tend to feed reports and dashboards. Then All of these you can load on schedule, load on demand, save prior versions. So you're snapping data out of these systems, usually every day. You're pushing it out to the team, and then you're saving the history so you have the ability to go back at it. So in synthesis and modeling, there's three kinds of things you need to do. Metrics and calculations is numeric. I want to take hard cash minus pledge payments. That's a numeric metric to get current giving. String. I want to concatenate. Name and city and street and something to create a key to index against something else. Date. I want to know, how long since the last contact. So you want to take the last contact date and subtract it from the date the data was loaded. Logical. If the last contact date is more than 2 years, flag it because that person hasn't been contacted in more than 2 years. Hierarchical. I want to have, states on top of cities on top of addresses. So I want to see, a bar chart of prospects by state. I click the state. I want to drill down to the city, and then not really in this world, but in IP addresses. If it's any kind of, we do a lot of work in cybersecurity. You need to be able to work with those. Then there's predictive modeling, and it kind of does three things. It's descriptive. So if I want to figure out of all the stuff I've calculated here, what constitutes somebody making a gift at or above their capacity level. So say I take all my prospects who are rated 100,000 or up, and I want to understand the difference between those that have made the gift and not. You can run a predictive model against, how many of the last 5 years they made a gift, how many events have they been to in the last 2 years, have they been to reunions, all that stuff. And it will tell you what most influences the giving. And it might be, coming to events, and it might be then some kinds of events count more than others. So it can really help you understand if you're trying to cultivate people, what do you actually want to focus on to most cultivate them. So that's the descriptive side of it. The predictive is if you give me a bunch more people, who is most likely to make the gift at or above their $100,000 capacity, and it will score them from, say, 0 to 1 or whatever the scale is. We would then bin that into highly engaged, disconnected, detached, or whatever. So there's some wording around it, but that's predictive. That's telling you that if you give another group of alumni where they fit in this spectrum. And then embeddable means the modeling is, some models are standalone, you run them, and you get an output. Others, like ours, embed in the discovery system, so every day they re-execute and rescore everybody, so you're getting constantly updating scores on attachment or propensity to give or projected dollar amounts or potential yield of an appeal or whatever the model would be for. So that's modeling. And then the third part of this synthesis area is binning and grouping. So creatively parse text. For example, you have events and their names. It's the president's dinner in 2019 for this, and then there's the Africa and development, whatever, and then there's the social justice cause. So at some point, you don't want to work with like 1,000 event names. You want to work with 5 groups. So creatively parse tests means figure out, which ones are about social justice, which one are about sports and athletics, which ones are about arts and sciences, which ones are about, the vision of the institution or whatever. And that's, so you get the stuff in from the data, but then you group it so that you have handles on it, which is actually more useful for the modeling too, than just having, kind of a long string of 1,000 event names. You can create segmentations based on numeric scores. For example, the predictive modeling comes out 0 to 1. So somebody's a 0.62, somebody's a 0.78. The end user may not be able to understand that difference, and maybe statistically there isn't a difference. They should both be binned into something called highly engaged. And then the 0.2, 0.3, 0.38 get binned into engaged. So that's taking the scoring and making it much easier to use. And these groupings and binning should be cross fields, across dimensions in a database, but also across tables. So, part of the work we do here is creating groupings of maybe in the events table and putting it back in the entity table so everybody's flagged with the type of event. So you got to work these across tables as well as within tables. So here's a set of functions that typically happen somewhere in an effective business intelligence system. And then for outputs, you got reporting, which is structured and consistent, pixel perfect, pre-calculated, and indexed. We talked about that. You've got these data visualization dashboards, which are visual, easy to see patterns, somewhat interactive. And then you've got data discovery outputs, which are extremely interactive, explore anything, anywhere, cross-table, one-to-many, export results and lists. So you got this different set of outputs from pretty structured to not so structured. And the last piece of this overall equation is generally there's professional services that layer across to help put these things in. And no matter whether it's your team or some outside provider, you should start with the questions you're trying to answer so that this actually does something useful, especially down in the discovery area. It should be the strategic context and assessment can come out of this thing, because when you put these in, you'll know kind of where you stand, and they've got to help set up the access and blending, synthesizer. So all this stuff needs to get set up by somebody, because it's a bunch of transformation from all these. Typically, these systems are going to have 30, 50, 100 tables. You might have another 5, 10, 20 down here to turn it into useful output. And then the way these work is typically there's a path across the top, which is the warehouse, typically has some metrics calculation, goes into report. And back to the beginning, this is great for financials. They totally fit this. It's structured, it's consistent, it's pixel perfect. People aren't generally mucking around and exploring, doing discovery in them. Campaign dashboards can be similar. Field officers is another one where generally field officers are not going to do a lot of exploring and do data discovery. It's just not their job. It's not what they're best at. Down here, the in-memory MAR typically feeds more of a cross-cut of the synthesis and tends to go down to the data discovery outputs. And this is prospect pool management metrics, annual giving, prospect identification. This is probably the most interactive slicing and dicing. Want to create metrics, play around with data. This is probably the least, and there's a spectrum here. And then there's a set of tools that go up against them. So up at the top, the CRM's reporting systems and Microsoft SQL Server reporting services, Cognos, are all great examples of reports. In the middle, Tableau and Power BI are the dominant, visual dashboards that do this kind of thing really well. We and ClickTech are the data discovery tools with a really strong in-memory MAR. And down at the bottom for the hardcore analysts is R, Python, and SAS, the heavy core tools. So in a well-formed system, these things are typically all there and work together. Like we have lots of clients that have SQL Server reporting services along with Power BI and us, or they've got Cognos and Tableau and us, and then maybe somebody down here also working in R or Python. Although I would argue we can supplant that, in our analytics are equally powerful. But where this gets into a problem is when you have just like maybe this top part and you're trying to use it down here. Now I'm going to just jump in and show an example of prospect pool management using. I'm going to use Advisor because that's who we are. So I'm going to click this, and this is opening a pull from the data from, say, yesterday, and it's running on a web server. It's going to unpack the data. So it stored the data from the pull with all the calculations from last night. It opens it into memory, and I'm running in a browser. This can be run from anywhere. I'm going to close this descriptive panel on the left. I'm going to hit like 3 pages in this. But this is a major giving portfolio management tool meant to be used with teams. And there's this page on goals. So just high level, we've got 17 prospect managers with 1,800 prospects. There's a projected current year amount of 38 million. There's 34 million. There's 38 and change of open asks. That ratio is a little tight. You'd like this higher. There's 215 open asks. And then it looks like closed last year was 80, and they closed 12 million, and that's kind of this number again. So it's okay performance. And then what we're looking at is some of the key goals here. How many assignments per manager? So here's the managers, each is a bar. I'm going to focus on in a minute Michael Ortiz. So he's got 106. So the way we like to show this kind of data in a tool like this is there's a benchmark, typically 75 to 125. And then you're seeing the performance or the layout of the prospects against the rest of the team. So Michael's right in the middle. It's good. It's great. Visits last 12 months by the contactor. We're going to look at this. Visits fiscal year to date. We don't particularly like this, but it's a very common one. Numbers closed in the last 12 months. 8 to 10 is pretty much what we're seeing across the board for top quartile performance for major giving, 25 or 50,000 and up higher gifts. Dollars closed. Here we've got, I think, $1 million to $2 million is the range. If you're actually going to have ROI on a field officer, you probably need to be in that range. And then open asks, which is looking forward, the numbers of open asks 20 to 30, because if you're going to close 8 to 10, you're going to close a quarter to a third of them. You better have 20 to 30 out. So I'm going to do a review with Michael Ortiz. So I'm just going to click him on this bar. So with a discovery tool, first thing that happens, I can sort of see Michael's performance highlighted now against his peers. So his pool size is pretty good. He's running under on visits in the last 12 months. He's done 48. The target's 75 to 125. So he's below the benchmark, and he's in the bottom half of his group. Fiscal year to date, about the same. Numbers closed last year. This is last 12 months. 7. He's in the top quartile, right about the benchmark, pretty good. And he closed $1.5 million. So he must have got a big one in. Great. I'm a little worried though about open asks. He's down at 5, which is really low, and it's way below, especially the top quartile, even the middle of the group. So let's go a little further in Michael. I'm going to bring people back. So this has detail on penetration, which is of my pool. How many have I connected with in the last 12 months? Because maybe he's not connecting with people. Stage timing is of his portfolio. How long have they been into the different stages versus his peers? Yield and solicitation levels is he asking at the right level compared to his peers, and is he closing? And then there's some more graphics and so forth and details. So this is oriented from left to right, from kind of high level to more detail. But go to the penetration page, and we're going to drill in on Michael in a second. But what I've done is I've taken my whole team here. Heather Ashford's at the top. Her width is determined by how many prospects she has. She has 148, so she's one of the wider bars. And the color is the dark blue is they have an active proposal and have been visited in the last 12 months. The blue is they have an active solicitation, have not been visited. So if I'm expecting 25 to 30 of these top two groups in solicitation, and my pool sizes are roughly 100, I expect to see about a quarter of the color be these. Well, Heather's either has a new portfolio or something's going on because she doesn't have much blue. Don Bastilis, on the other hand, has bunch of blue, so he's got like a quarter of his portfolios in solicitation. The green is they've been visited in the last 12 months, don't have a solicitation. He's up to, between the solicitations to visiting, he's up at 65%. That's great. The target is 50. And then he's had some contact, the fuchsia orange, whatever this is here, it brings him up to 95%. So I'm going, wow, Don, you're doing a great job of covering your portfolio. If I look across, Kathleen Mitchell down here is having some challenges. I mean, it looks like she's only been able to connect with a third of her portfolio. The other 2/3 are uncovered. That's not good. In fact, all of this red means we've assigned prospects and then they've not been connected with it over a year. So we probably want to look at that. And this gets around I don't really, at some point, maybe Kathleen's doing a lot of visits, but maybe she's visiting out of her portfolio or she's making multiple visits to the same person. What I really care about is she reaching the prospects that we've determined to be good and have been assigned to her. So I'm going to come back to Michael again. My buddy Michael from the prior page is down here. We saw that he doesn't have a lot of active solicitations, so a little bit of blue. He's been able to connect with in person another third of his portfolio. He hasn't done much, other contacts, so he's only reached 45% of his portfolio. So let's drill in. I'm going to click Michael here, and then I'm going to go up and intersect the red. So now I've got the red, which is out of his 106, 56 of his prospects he's not reached. They have a projected value of $2.3 million. He actually closed something, so there must be some data anomalies here because I don't know how he would have closed and not connected. But these people I want to drill in on more detail. So if I just go across to the prospects page, so I'm just showing how a discovery tool helps drive this conversation. Here's a profile of Michael's 56 prospects who, as of last night, have had no connection in the last 12 months by anybody. This is Michael or anybody else in the system. No deans, no professors, nobody else. Alums, friends, parents, not bad. Wealth capacity, 500 to a million, not the biggest, but not bad. Over here, attachment, only 3 are highly engaged. And there's a whole bunch down here are disconnected, 52. I'm a little worried about that. That's a big disconnected. Time since last visit, some have been visited, in the last over 2 years. A whole bunch haven't. So let's look at his list. So if I'm with Michael, I'm going to drill into this list and I'm going to sort of start talking about this. So we've got them sorted here by amount closed. So this must be a data error, Michael. Let's clean this up. I don't know how you close something and there's no contact. And then you've made ask to another group here, another 3. So it's maybe some data cleanup. So, okay, let's maybe subtract those. Let's focus on the other 52. So I got rid of those. And let's just drop them out of here. So now we're down to the 52 that don't seem to have data things. At the top, there's Milo, Watt, and Cole Ziedenstein, who have projected amounts of $7 million because they've got 10 million plus capacity and they're highly engaged. Wow, they're highly engaged because these are the factors blended from the other tables. They've been on 2 committees each. They've been to 2 events in the last, how long? Let's slide this over a little bit. Last 2 years. They've given in the last 2 of the last 5 years. They gave in, it looks like 2 of the years before that. They've been to 6 reunions. Wow, these are all the factors that matter to attachment. Let's actually look at one of these. Let's look at Milo. I'm curious, like, has this person been giving anything? So I'm going to click on Milo and go over here to the giving history page. So Milo was worth $10 million, highly engaged, is given $7,500 total life. And it looks like the good news is picking up. Like this is by year, 1,000, 1,500, in 2017, 3,000. I would say, hey, Michael, you got to get on Milo and Cole right away. But then I look at the rest of this. You know, they're all 500, but they're all disconnected. So maybe Michael's made some rational decisions that have drilled on the data because these are all disconnected people who should probably be sent back to leadership annual giving to be cultivated some more. You know, get them engaged. The capacities aren't huge. So maybe the issue isn't Michael, who actually just had a good year, but we're worried about his next year making the energy. It's maybe he has the wrong portfolio. So I'm going to tell Michael, get off your butt and get to these 2, but let's do some portfolio reconstruction. We'll be back going again. So that's an example of a discovery tool. If you think about it, we started with this first page. Let's bring everybody back. This is a typical dashboard, but that discovery tool lets you drill down into portfolios like that and have those discussions and see the stories and help the team do better. So I'm going to keep going here, just in the interest of time. Another really good use of a discovery tool is relationship mapping. So you can select a specific person, and we can create a ranked list of people with the strongest connection to that person. For example, select John Smith and get a list of all the other alums he's most likely to know. The list will be ranked with a numerical score, and the factors that drive the score will be visible. Like the class of 77, people in that will get higher. The class of 78 will get a score but a little lower because they're nearby. They might have known each other. Engineering major, same major, played on the hockey team. That's going to get a score. They were in the same fraternity, live in Chicago. So if you could picture a discovery tool that literally lets you, if you want to find that Milo or Cole, those 2 people that had not been connected with from Michael, you could go here and click on them and would show who is most likely to know them, and it will give you a ranked score. You're going to find out, I don't know, John Smith or, Heather Ashford is most likely to know them. Well, maybe one of them is a large donor on one of your executive committees, and you can go to that person and get them to set up a lunch with Cole. This is beautiful. And this is the value of a discovery tool. If you try to do this by pre-scoring like 100,000 people against 100,000 people, you go crazy. But the in-memory mark lets you pick the person, and on the fly, it figures out all the linkages and the rankings and creates the score. And if you're interested in this, we'll have the handouts, but there's a YouTube link here where we talk about this with Dartmouth College, where we piloted this program last summer and now have this up and running at a number of schools that really, really like it. This fits better to higher education, where there's more affinity connection information than it does with healthcare or nonprofits, where there's less of the connection data. So the high level of all of this is, if you get the right tools and you don't overuse reporting and dashboards, you kill what we call the cycle of pain, which is, we've talked about it, but it's, you get a query request IT, you get a backlog, you get it, you see something, it's not what you thought, it goes back and forth, and it just causes frustration. Or downloading extracts into Excel and slicing and dicing it. It's time consuming. You don't have all the data, and it's hard to show management. And then when you get it. It was really hard to get, so you save it. So now your Excel sheet's 2 months old and it hasn't updated. Well, a discovery tool like ours updates every day, or it can update on demand. So you eliminate these problems, and what happens is you get this cultural change. We get answers in seconds, like in a meeting. You could have that discussion, more collaboration. You see stories versus just stats. You get improved performance. Like the Michael Ortiz, it's not a stat. He's having a problem with portfolio penetration, but partly he needs to get on at least a couple of people. Partly we need to do some portfolio rebuild, more analytical and strategic thinking, and 90% reduction in custom reports. And if you look at that, this is one of our clients. Here's a level of custom report requests, cycle of pain, put us in, eliminated substantially, like 90% of that. So here's the running forward custom report requests. And then it empowered the team. It freed the team up to do more strategic things and continually cutting data for requests, which could be self-service enabled, which is our world. So just to summarize, went into some detail on outlining business intelligence levels in sort of contrasting reports and dashboards, which clearly everybody needs, and they come with systems, and there's a lot of them out there, and they do a bunch of things really well, but they're not designed to do these more interactive, story-oriented discovery, drill-through, slicing and dicing. And we often see these systems being used over here, and they cause a cycle of pain. And part of this message was that was the title. If all you've got is this, you're kind of doomed, because you're going to just slow the pace of the organization down. It's going to be really hard to see the stories and the data with enough texture that you could drill in like we did with Michael and understand what's really going on underneath. I mean, it's not Michael's doing a great job. He's got a problem going forward, but we've identified it now and we can take action on it. That's what a discovery tool does. So I think that's the end of today's story. We've got time for some questions. This has been recorded and will be posted up on our site along with the slides within a week or so. So if you've got questions, there's a panel at the bottom where you can put the question in and we'll pick it up and answer it live. So yeah, here's a question. Can you use discovery tools for reporting and dashboards, which is actually the other way. I think the question underneath is, do you need both of them? The answer is you probably do need both of them, because as much as I'm biased towards discovery tools, I mean, they don't have the formatting, they don't have the structure, the repeatability, a lot of the things a reporting tool has. So the beauty of a reporting tool, it's structured, it's formatted, it looks good. You can't, like, the user can't click on it and change it, so it's got a structure and standard look to it. So I think you actually do need both of them, and you'd have problems if you took the reporting tool and the discovery tool and used it for reporting, much like using the reporting tool for discovery. So the question about predictive modeling. Is it better to use a separate modeling tool or one embedded in a discovery tool like yours? That's a loaded question. So there's a lot of subparts to it. I would say it depends on the caliber of the team. So if you have I was just at a presentation at K-State last week, and one of the presenters said, the problem with rich analytics is rich analytics will be done for analytics' sake and may not actually solve a problem the end users have. And the problem with like stats people using R and Python is you can create these incredibly complex models that may get detached from what the actual end users can understand and need to do their job and raise more money. Our approach with modeling has been to simplify and make it point and click in Excel macro-like. So you don't need a stats degree to use it. And we've also limited it down to two kinds of models, a classification model and a standard linear regression model, whereas these modeling tools have more models. So a bit of a rambling way of saying there's some danger to having somebody, I've seen this over and over again, who's a modeling expert use a rich tool can overcomplicate the models and not actually help the cause, whereas having something that's embedded in the tool that's a little bit simpler, that, like the way I showed the attachment, people get that. And I've used this with field officers. I've used it with frontline people. I've used it with all kinds of people. And when they see engaged versus disconnected, and then they see the factors on the right, there's only like a half a dozen factors. It's not 190. It's a handful of factors that really matter. And they can see this person is engaged and this person is detached. And the reason is this person's been to events and been on reunions, and this other person hasn't. They get it. And that whole layout and simplicity is really important. So I'm not sure I answered the question, but I would say with modeling, just keep it simple. Make sure it stays focused on the problem, and make sure the outputs are understandable in English language to people who aren't stats experts, and you'll have a win. Also, the last thing is you should embed in the core system so it updates every day. It doesn't do very much good to have attachment scores that happen every 6 months or once a year and never update, because they're changing. They're changing as people make gifts and come to events. So you actually want the models, and the models can be done in a complicated tool like R or SAS or Python, and they can be embedded in systems like ours. But they ought to be embedded in the system so they update. Does a reporting tool require a data warehouse? We don't have one. No, it doesn't. The reporting tools can load from the CRM system source tables, and there are, Microsoft SQL Server reporting services. I know Banner has a lot of Argos front ends. I mean, they kind of have to do some of the warehouse in the reporting tool, but yeah, they can load straight from the source tables. And much like if you take a data discovery tool, I mean, ideally we'd love when there's a data warehouse, because it saves a bunch of the structuring that we have to do in our in-memory mart if there's not a data warehouse. And then we'd also have to load some of the detailed source tables. But you could put a discovery or a reporting tool in without a warehouse. The warehouse makes it easier, standardizes definitions. I'll go a little further. So one problem we've seen without the warehouse is somebody puts the reporting tool in and creates a bunch of definitions in the reporting tool. Then they put us in a discovery tool, create a bunch of definitions in us, and they don't line up. And then all of a sudden, you've got one thing showing, high impact visits one way, the other thing showing it a different way, or even the giving calculations can get out of sync. So it's good to have the definitions done in one place, but not critical. So your system works in coordination with Razor's Edge, etc. From where does all the input data come? So, our advisor is CRM system agnostic. We're loading data tables. So if they're on premise, where they have been pretty much up until recently, they're in SQL Server data tables or Oracle data tables, pretty much those two. There's some in, I think we have some Pervasive in MySQL and other databases, but we're loading database tables. So we store read-only access to the database, and then at, say, 3 in the morning, after the backup window, we kick off and pull the tables out and load them into our memory, and then store the whole thing back as a file. So our end product is like a 200 megabyte Excel workbook. It's an advisor workbook that sits on something somewhere, and then when somebody comes to use it, it opens up into memory wherever they are. That's our load routine. If they're hosted, we are partners of pretty much all the CRM vendors, and we have an extractor from NXT that gets the data out in a reasonable period of time. We're working with Blackbaud CRM. There's a partner we have there that can get that out. Ellucian's new CRM Advanced, which is hosted, we can get that out. We're doing a database backup. Well, they have a tool that can get that. So all of those conceptually look the same. That the data is coming from the cloud hosted CRM somewhere, and the somewhere can be, we have a hosted site. We've got one client who uses Razor's Edge NXT. They don't actually have to do anything. They have to give us passcodes, because we just download it to our hosted site, and then they access Advisor out of there, and it's the full data set updating every night. Others prefer to bring it down on premise because their basic reporting and all the other tools are there. So the beauty of these hosted things is more and more of them come, you've got more flexibility in where the data can actually go and where the front-end apps can run. And I think there's a question here about updating nightly. So with NXT, there's a question about updating NXT nightly. We run a script that kicks off our extractor, say at whenever, 3 in the morning, and it kicks off the extractor. It goes up to Razor's Edge NXT, drops down a bunch of, right now it's text files, plops them somewhere. We can load it. Other systems can load it. They're all sitting there on a file server, either in our cloud or on premise. We've got a large NXT client where they're all coming down on premise. We've got another one where they end up in the cloud. But yeah, it's completely automated. Don't have to do anything. It just runs. We've never had a problem with it. It's new. I mean, I think we've had it up and running since. Well, the Razor's Edge Sky API has been out since maybe June of 17, and I think we've finally got working with them fully functional, high speed, get this thing out in a reasonable period of time every night and plop it somewhere. We started really deploying in the fall, maybe the summer, but not too long ago. Good questions there. Any more? I'm looking. I've got a lot of stuff that's come in here. There's a question, I guess, I see another question about security, which I will paraphrase. So we run several ways. We run as a web app. We can run as an Apple iOS iPad app. We can run as a Windows desktop app. We are applying, we run under file level security. So if somebody comes in to the web app, it's going to figure out what permissions are on the file that they're accessing through a URL, and it will force through to us whatever. Usually it's Windows authentication. If it's on premise, we have a separate security system. If we host it, it'll force through authentication, either let the person in or not. And we can also apply filtering based on who's coming through. So, maybe the East Region Manager comes through and sees, the portfolios for just the East, and the West Region sees only the West, even though the project actually has the full data set. So the security can involve yes, no, access, not access, or it could also provide access to just subsets of the whole data set. The iOS is basically the same way. It forces through the file authentication in the desktop. It is basically like Excel in that way. So that's our world. Another question, are there limits to the amount of data that an in-memory discovery tool can use? Not in fundraising. So we can handle, I think our bigger clients have 150 tables from 3 or 4 sources. So in the healthcare world, we might have, 60 Blackbaud CRM tables. We might then have Epic extracts from the patient system. There might be extracts from a outpatient system. There might be 3 hospitals with separate extracts. So we're basically grabbing all of that. And then in memory, we've got clients where we've got 150 tables, 300 to 500 total fields, maybe 100 million total rows of data. Typically a big client would be 5 million, 5 million entities, 30, 40 million gift transactions, 15, 20 million event participation logs, that kind of stuff. Appeal sends can get big. Typically, we're going back just a couple years, so we can also filter when we load data, so we don't have to load like all the appeal sent for the last 100 years. We just really care about the last few years because we're trying to look at yield and performance, and that ancient history isn't as valuable there. So, yeah, we've never had a memory capacity issue in fundraising sector with any of our clients. So we run from some of the largest state universities, some of the largest privates. We've got some of the major healthcare providers. So we got some pretty big clients. And performance. What I was showing you was sub-second. That's our standard sub-second interaction response on any interaction across any set of dimensions on any of the charts on any of the pages, sub-second. And we expect load times to be in the 10 to 30 seconds. That's assuming the data was preloaded out of the database the night before. Then when the users come in, the file opens is typically 10 to 30 seconds. Could be a little longer if it's a really big file. And then once it's loaded, sub-second response is I think we've always had that. That's different. So that's another question. Some of the visualization tools like a Tableau or Power BI have interaction, but it's architected very differently. They're bringing data into Chartit. graph it, and you can connect the charts to each other. Those of you that know Tableau or Power BI, so you've got some cross-dimensional capability. Our model is very different. We bring the entire data set in. It's in our app, and then the charts connect to the data, not to each other. So if you tag a chart like I was doing, it tags the data, then all the tables in the pool update, and then all the other charts update. So we sustain sub-second interaction across any number of interactions across any number of tables, whereas the visualization tools typically start bogging down with more than 1 or 2 levels of interaction, to the point where it could be 20, 30, 60, 120 seconds or longer. They basically don't work. It's not what they're designed to do. There's a lot of writing on that in the different blogs. I mean, they're designed to look at data with some interaction. We're designed to let you cross-query, slice and dice to any level of detail, exploring, discovering, finding stories. So, yeah, that's a good question. Got me talking there. Keep them coming. Anything else? I think we're reaching the end of our questions. Yeah, I'll give you a couple more seconds to throw a question in. Otherwise, we will call it a day. And if you have more questions, we will be sending this out. And, you can reach us. You got my contact information below. We love talking about this stuff. And I see, thank you came in. Yeah, thanks. Okay, I've got it. So we're going to declare victory here. You've got an extra few minutes of your day back, and we'll be in touch when we get this posted and out. Thanks very much for the time. Have a good day. Bye.